My mother called me her biggest disappointment in a lawyer's office, then used a family trust to leave my sister the entire $3.85 million farm I had spent years keeping alive. She thought she had erased me with one sentence. 3 years later, that same farm was days away from foreclosure. My sister was drowning in debt, and the bank was ready to take everything. What none of them knew was that the only signature that could stop the sale was mine. My name is Merritt Calder, and by the time my mother tried to put me back on the deed, I had already decided she would never get to measure my worth again. Chapter 1: The Trust That Erased Me. The first thing I remember about Mr. Layton's office was the smell. Burned coffee, lemon floor cleaner, an old carpet that had been vacuumed too many times, but never really cleaned. The room was too bright for grief. White light pressed down from the ceiling panels, flattening every face around the conference table until my family looked less like people and more like evidence. My mother, Merritt Calder, sat with her back perfectly straight, her pearl earrings catching the light every time she turned her head. She always sat that way in public, as if there were a church pew under her, and an entire congregation watching to see whether she would bend. My father, Grant, sat beside her with both hands folded in front of him, staring through the blinds at the parking lot. My younger sister, Sloane Calder Reeves, wore a cream wool coat I had never seen before. She sat between them, close enough to be protected, close enough to be controlled. I had driven down from Burlington that morning because I thought we were finishing Grandpa Ellis's paperwork. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood beside his grave while the April wind moved across Addison County and bent the grass toward Hollow Creek. I thought this meeting would be about his last papers. Maybe the farmhouse, maybe the land he had loved more honestly than anyone else in our family knew how to love anything. I thought we were there to settle what was left of him. I was wrong. The Calder family trust had existed for years, long before Grandpa's health began to fail. My parents had always described it as a simple family structure, a way to keep property safe, a way to avoid confusion someday. In 2020, when Grandpa Ellis could no longer manage Hollow Creek Farm on his own, the farm had been moved into that trust to protect it. That was the word they used. Protect what I did not know, sitting in that cold office in April of 2021, was that Marilyn and Grant had signed an amendment in October of 2019. That amendment said every family real estate asset already inside the trust, and every property added later, would go to Sloane. It also said I would receive nothing. So by the time Hollow Creek was moved into the trust, I had already been erased from it. Mr. Layton adjusted his glasses and began reading in the dry, careful voice lawyers use when they want pain to sound administrative. Hollow Creek Farm, including the main residence, barn, hayfields, pasture lots, and Lake Road parcels along Lake Marrow Road, together with all related rights held by the Calder Family Trust, was valued at approximately $3.85 million. Upon distribution, title and operating control would pass to Sloane Calder Reeves. Sloane looked down at her hands. My mother did not. Then Mr. Layton turned a page. To our daughter Merritt Calder, after careful consideration, we leave nothing. For a moment, I did not feel anything. That is what people never understand about a real blow. It does not always land as pain. Sometimes it arrives as silence. Sometimes your body goes still because some part of you is trying to decide whether you heard correctly. The coffee machine clicked in the corner. Paper slid against paper. My mother exhaled so softly I might have missed it if I had not spent my whole life learning the weather of her breathing. She looked directly at me. You were always our biggest disappointment. No one moved. I looked at my father first. That was an old instinct, one I hated myself for keeping. Grant Calder had spent most of his life standing 2 steps behind my mother's certainty, letting her decide the shape of every room he entered. He did not look at me. He watched a pickup truck pull into the lot outside as if it carried more truth than his own daughter. I asked, very quietly, was this Grandpa's decision? My mother's mouth tightened, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for me. Your grandfather understood loyalty. So do we. Dad finally spoke, but still did not turn his head. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Sloane's lips parted. Mum, that was all she got out. Marilyn shifted her eyes toward my sister just once, and Sloane folded back into silence. I loved her then and hated her then, both feelings sitting in my chest like stones. She was 32 years old, a wife, a mother, a woman with a child of her own, and still my mother could stop her with a glance. Mr. Layton cleared his throat and explained the no contest clause. If I challenged the Calder family trust, I would lose any contingent benefits still tied to the family estate, any minor claim that might arise from related property, and any future distribution my parents might otherwise choose to make. It was a warning dressed up as procedure. A fence built around an empty field. I looked down at the date on the amendment, October 2019, 18 months before Grandpa died, before the funeral flowers, before the sympathy casseroles. Before my mother held my hand at the cemetery and told the church ladies that grief made families complicated. They had not made this decision in sorrow. They had made it in advance. I thought of the last 2 years of Grandpa Ellis's life. I thought of the Friday drives from Burlington after work, my headlights cutting through rain on Route 7, while my phone buzzed with messages I was too tired to answer. I thought of the ledgers I balanced after the hired man quit, the feed bill I paid because the account was short, the insurance agent I called twice in 1 week because the policy was about to lapse. I thought of the property tax notice I found under a stack of seed catalogs. I thought of Grandpa waking at 2 in the morning, confused and frightened, asking whether his wife was still in the next room, though she had been dead for 11 years. I had sat beside him in the dark and told him he was safe. None of that was in the trust. There was no line for the daughter who remembered the medication schedule. No paragraph for the woman who knew which gate sagged, which field flooded, which drawer Grandpa kept the old deeds in. No clause for the person who kept the place breathing when everyone else called it sentimental. Mr. Layton placed a pen near my hand. I looked at it for a long second. It was a nice pen, heavy and black, the kind people used when they wanted a signature to feel final. Maybe they expected me to sign something acknowledging receipt. Maybe they expected me to cry first, or argue, or ask what I had done wrong. Maybe my mother wanted that most of all, one last scene she could use later as proof that she had always been right about me. I stood. Then there's nothing here for me to sign. My chair made a small sound against the carpet. Everyone heard it. For the first time, my father looked at me. His face had gone pale, but his mouth stayed closed. That was Grant Calder's talent. He could make silence look like regret without ever having to spend it. Sloane whispered my name as I reached the door. Merritt. I did not turn around. If I turned around, I would have to see her still sitting between them. I would have to see the cream wool coat, the lowered eyes, the inheritance resting on her lap like a sleeping child. I would have to see that she was sorry, but not sorry enough to stand up, so I kept walking. The hallway outside Mr. Layton's office was narrow and smelled like copier toner. I passed a framed watercolor of a covered bridge, a stack of real estate brochures, a receptionist who looked up and then looked away. I made it all the way to my car before my hands started shaking. I sat in the parking lot with both palms pressed against the steering wheel. That was when the pain came. Not because I had lost Hollow Creek. Not really. Land can be measured. Houses can be appraised. Barns can be insured or abandoned or sold. What broke something inside me was the way my parents had turned a trust document into proof that I was not worth loving. They had taken every quiet thing I had carried and placed it against one legal sentence. We leave nothing. I drove back to Burlington without turning on the radio. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made decisions I did not say out loud. I stopped calling my mother. I stopped asking my father questions he was too weak to answer. I stopped taking the road past Lake Merritt when work brought me near Addison County. I added 20 minutes to my trips rather than past the mailbox at Hollow Creek. After Grandpa's funeral, his neighbor Arthur Pike had handed me a cardboard box from the back of his truck. He said Ellis had set it aside for me before things got bad. The box was taped at the corners, soft from age, with my name written across the top in Grandpa's uneven hand for Merritt. That night, I carried it into my apartment and set it in the back of my closet. I did not open it. I thought I was putting away grief. I did not know I was putting away the only thing that could save Hollow Creek 3 years later. Chapter 2: The Daughter. We kept the land after that day. I did not go back to Hollow Creek. I did not call my mother to ask whether she had meant it. I did not call my father to ask why he had let her say it. I did not call Sloane to ask whether she had known before she sat down in that cream wool coat and watched our parents hand her my history. I did not drive past the mailbox on Lake Merritt Road, not once. When work brought me through Addison County, I took the long way around, adding 20 minutes to trips that were already too long, just so I would not see the place where my name had been removed while the land stayed exactly where it was. People like to mistake silence for weakness. They think if you do not slam a door, you have not closed it. But that was the first door I ever locked from my side. For 3 years, I built a life that did not require anyone in Hollow Creek to approve of it. By the fall of 2024, I was 38 years old, and there was a small brass sign outside a second-floor office in Burlington that read Merritt Calder, Farmland Preservation Consultant. The office was not impressive. It had 2 rooms, 1 window that stuck in July, a coffee maker that groaned like an old tractor, and 2 part-time employees who could find a missing parcel number faster than most lawyers could find their reading glasses. But it was mine. I worked with farm co-ops, local banks, conservation groups, and families who were one bad season away from losing land their grandparents had broken their backs to keep. Most of those families had the same problem. They were land rich and cash poor. On paper, they owned something beautiful. In real life, they were drowning under property taxes, insurance premiums, equipment loans, and barns that needed roofs before winter. My job was to help them keep the land without pretending the debt would disappear because they loved it enough. One October morning, I sat at a kitchen table outside Middlebury with a dairy couple named Paul and Ann Mercer. Their youngest son had taken the morning milking, and the house smelled like wet wool, coffee, and wood smoke. Anne kept twisting a napkin in her hands while Paul stared at a bank letter lying between us. "They want 80 acres, Paul said. "That is the backfield. My father cleared that field." "I know," I said. Annie looked at me like I had brought the bad news myself. "So what are you telling us to do? Sell it?" "No," I said. "I am telling you not to sell the farm. I am telling you to sell the right to turn that field into condos." They both looked at me. I pulled a map from my folder and turned it so they could see. Green Valley Land Trust can purchase the development rights through a farmland preservation program. The money goes into escrow. The bank gets paid down. You keep the land. You keep farming it. But no one, not you, not your kids, not anyone after you, can sell that acreage to a developer for lake houses or condos. Paul blinked slowly. So the land stays land. That is the point. Anne put one hand over her mouth, and I looked down at my notes because sometimes people needed a second to hope without being watched. Graham Bell from Green Valley Land Trust met me in the driveway afterward. He was 58, tall, soft-spoken, with a canvas jacket and the tired eyes of a man who had spent too many years explaining to good people that loving land was not always enough to save it. "You have a gift," he said, leaning against his truck. "You make frightened people understand paperwork." I almost laughed. Paperwork only scares people because someone usually used it against them first. He studied me for half a second, long enough that I knew he had heard more than the sentence. Then he nodded and said, "Fair enough." I went back to Burlington that afternoon and buried myself in maps, lien searches, bank calls, easement language, title notes. That was how I survived. I turned fear into folders. I turned grief into deadlines. I turned everything my family had called difficult into the exact skill other people paid me for. Still, Hollow Creek had a way of finding me through other people's mouths. Deborah Harlan owned the feed store outside town and sat on the Hollow Creek Farm Co-op board. She was 61, blunt in the way only women who had survived small towns could be blunt, and she had known Grandpa Ellis longer than she had known some of her own cousins. I ran into her at a co-op meeting in Vergennes that fall, where bad coffee and worse folding chairs made everyone honest by the second hour. She hugged me harder than I expected. "Your grandpa would have liked seeing your name on all these folders," she said. I looked away first. "He liked anyone who knew the difference between pasture and hay ground." Deborah smiled, but it faded quickly. "Your mother still talks about Hollow Creek like it's a crown jewel." "I'm sure she does. At church supper last month, she told Pastor Elaine that Sloan was going to bring the farm back. Said it was finally in the hands of someone who understood family. There it was. Marilyn's favorite kind of knife, polished until it looked like table silver." Deborah hesitated, then added, "She also said you chose distance. Said you never really cared for family land." For one bright, ugly second, I wanted to tell Deborah everything. I wanted to tell her about the ledger after the hired man quit, about the feed bill, about the insurance policy I saved from lapse while my mother was arranging flowers for church, about Grandpa shaking in the dark and asking me whether the barn was still standing. But town gossip was my mother's stage, and I had already walked off it. So I only said, "Marilyn has always been good at telling a clean story." Deborah's face softened, but she did not push. I knew how it looked from the outside. Marilyn in her pearls at Hollow Creek Community Church, Grant standing beside her in his pressed shirt, silent as a fence post. He never told the lies himself. That was what made him look harmless. But he stood close enough to them that people assumed he agreed. And he never corrected anyone. My father had built a whole life out of letting other people mistake his silence for peace. As for Sloan, I heard things in pieces. She wanted Hollow Creek to work. I believe that now, and part of me believed it even then. She had Lydia, a 5-year-old with crooked ponytails and a serious little face in every photo Deborah showed me without asking permission. Sloan wanted her daughter to grow up running barefoot across the same yard we had run across. She wanted the farmhouse painted, the barn patched, the pasture cleaned up, the family story restored. But Sloan had inherited a trophy, not a plan. She did not know what insurance cost when a barn roof had been patched too many winters in a row. She did not know how fast property taxes moved from notice to penalty. She did not know fence replacement could eat a month of income before a single animal stayed where it belonged. She did not know drainage could ruin hay ground quietly, one wet season at a time. And then there was Calvin Reeves, her husband. Calvin was the kind of man who always had a measuring tape on his belt and a reason something was not his fault. He called himself a contractor, though everyone in Hollow Creek knew his projects had a way of stopping halfway through. According to Deborah, his answer to every bill was the same: refinance one more time. We just need room to breathe. Room to breathe. Rest. That was what people called debt before it put both hands around their throat. Deborah told me once that Sloane's card had been declined at the feed store. Sloane laughed too quickly and said the bank's system was down. Deborah did not believe her, but she let the lie stand because sometimes shame was already punishment enough. I carried those scraps of information back to Burlington and told myself the same thing every time. Hollow Creek is not your business anymore. Some days I believed it. Other days, I admitted the smaller, meaner truth. I wanted to become so good at my work that my mother would have to hear my name from someone else and know she had been wrong. I wanted to build something large enough that it would cast a shadow all the way to Lake Merrow Road. But wanting Marilyn to see me was still wanting Marilyn. And if I was still waiting for her to measure me differently, then she was still holding the ruler. That was the thought I was trying to let go of when the call came. It was late October, and the maples outside my office window had turned the color of rust. I was reviewing a list of distressed parcels for the Hollow Creek Farm Co-op, half listening while a woman named Carla read names from the other end of the line. Briggs parcel, 12 acres. Mercer backfield already resolved. Then the Voss property near Route 22A. And there's also the Calder place. Hollow Creek Farm, that one's coming fast. My pen stopped moving. What did you say? The Calder place, Carla repeated. Hollow Creek Farm, Lake Merrow Road, Addison County. Foreclosure review pending. The room seemed to narrow around my desk. I asked her to send the file, and my voice sounded normal enough that I almost believed I was fine. When the email arrived, I did not open it right away. I sat there with my hand on the mouse, staring at the subject line like a person standing outside a door she had sworn never to touch again. Then I opened Public Records. Calder Family Trust, Sloan Reeves, Northfield Mutual Bank. First mortgage. Second mortgage, Porty tax arrears. Contractor lien, line by line. The story appeared in front of me. Colder and cleaner than gossip ever could. The $3.85 million gift my mother had used to prove I was worth. Nothing was being pulled out of the chosen daughter's hands by a bank. Chapter 3. The farm that was dying. In public, he stayed in the office long after my employees went home, with only the desk lamp on and the public records portal glowing blue across my face. This was what I did for strangers all the time. I read what people were too ashamed to say out loud. Mortgages, liens, unpaid taxes, warning letters, bank notices, every quiet disaster that hid behind a clean front porch and a smiling Christmas card. I knew how to separate fear from fact, but that night my hands were not steady. Hollow Creek Farm was still valued at roughly $3.85 million. That number sat there like a joke. Beneath it came the truth. A first mortgage with Northfield Mutual Bank for $412,000. A second mortgage for $186,000. Back property taxes of $39,700. Insurance and maintenance arrears just over $28,000. A contractor lien for $17,900. Filed after Calvin Reeves started barn repairs he never finished. Then an insurance warning tied to the roof on the main barn, the same roof Grandpa Ellis used to patch himself before his knees got bad. One mortgage, then another, then unpaid taxes. Then insurance slipping toward cancellation. Then a lien. Each page turned my mother's $3.85 million trophy into a debt bomb. Hollow Creek was not dying because it was worthless. It was dying because it had been handed to someone who had been trained to receive praise, not responsibility. For one ugly second, I leaned back in my chair and thought, good, let it burn. I hated the thought as soon as it came, but I did not pretend it was not mine. There is a kind of anger that does not shout. It simply sits in your chest and waits for the people who hurt you to finally meet the consequences they earned. I had spent 3 years being mature, being quiet, being practical. But in that moment, watching Northfield Mutual Bank circle the land my mother had used to erase me, I wanted the whole performance to collapse. The next morning I saw Deborah Harlan at a co-op meeting in Vergennes. She was pouring coffee from a metal urn and watching me the way older women watch storms they already knew were coming. You saw the Calder file, she said. I did not answer right away, Deborah sighed. Sloane's drowning, Merritt. She won't say it, but she is. I took the paper cup from her. How bad? Bad enough that her card got declined at my store buying feed, and she laughed like the machine was broken. That sounded like Sloane. Smile first, hide second, panic later. Calvin keeps telling her to refinance, Deborah continued. Says they just need room to breathe. Calvin would refinance a sinking boat if the bank let him. Deborah gave a humorless laugh. Grant had that heart scare last winter too, hospital for a week. Came home smaller. Marilyn still wears pearls to church and tells everyone they're restructuring for the next generation. Of course she did. That was my mother's gift. A foreclosure notice could be sitting on the kitchen table, and she would still call it restructuring if Pastor Elaine was in the room. No one says the word foreclosure around her, Deborah added. She'd take it as betrayal. She takes weather as betrayal if it ruins her plans. Deborah looked at me for a long moment. Shame about you girls. However, that all shook out. I could have corrected her. I could have told her that nothing shook out. It had been arranged, signed, and performed. I could have told her that I had not left Hollow Creek because I did not care about land. I left because my mother turned land into a courtroom and made me listen to the verdict. But Marilyn had already written the town version. Merritt walked away. Sloane stayed. Marilyn held the family together. I held the coffee until it went cold. That night, another memory came back sharp enough to hurt. It was 2020, in Grandpa's kitchen, long before Mr. Layton's office. The lights were dim, the table covered in bills, and I was entering an insurance payment with my own card because the policy was 2 days from lapse. Dad came in for water and saw the screen. He knew. He saw the amount. He saw my name. He saw me paying to keep coverage on a farm everyone else loved in speeches. He did not thank me. He only said, "Don't tell your mother. She'll say you're making us look helpless." That was my father, not blind, not innocent. Just more afraid of Marilyn's embarrassment than of my exhaustion. I drove back to Burlington with Deborah's words and Dad's old sentence turning over in my head. When I got home, the apartment was dark except for the hallway light I always forgot to turn off. I stood in front of the closet for almost a full minute before I reached for Grandpa's box. I had taken it out twice in 3 years. Both times I put it back. Not because I did not care, because I cared too much. I knew what old paper smelled like. I knew what Grandpa's barn coat smelled like after rain. I knew his handwriting would break something open in me that I had worked very hard to seal. I had told myself the box only held old deeds and memories. This time, I cut the tape. Inside were exactly the kinds of things I expected, and one thing I did not. Old deeds, folded soft at the edges, some going back to my great-grandparents. A hand-drawn map of the fields with Grandpa's blocky notes beside the low wet corners, the hay ground, the pasture that always greened first in spring. Tax notices from decades before. A receipt for fence posts. A soil report with coffee stains on the corner. And then a white envelope with my name on it. Merritt. His handwriting was worse than I remembered. I sat on the floor to open it. Grandpa Ellis did not waste words. He never had. He wrote that he knew my parents would choose Sloane. He wrote that Marilyn had always mistaken obedience for love, and Grant had always let her. He wrote that they called me difficult because I saw the thing other people wanted to leave covered. He wrote that he had not left me money, because money would only make me another name in a fight over a deed. Then he gave me something else. A contact at Green Valley Land Trust. A note from an old conversation with Graham Bell. A rough estimate of Hollow Creek's eligibility for farmland preservation. Based on acreage, soil, lake road development pressure, and working farm history. At the bottom, in handwriting that slanted badly, he had written, "You'll know what to do, girl. You were the only one who loved the soil, not the deed." I read that line 3 times. The box did not save Hollow Creek. Grandpa had not left me a miracle. He had left me a door. And he had known I was the only one in the family who would understand how to open it. Still, I did not decide that night. The next afternoon, I drove to Hollow Creek. I did not pull into the driveway. I stopped along the far fence line where the road dipped and the sugar maples hid most of my car. The fence was sagging. Thistle had taken over the near pasture. The barn roof was patched with blue tarp so faded it had gone almost gray. The farmhouse looked smaller than it used to. Or maybe I had finally stopped seeing it through Grandpa's eyes. On the front door, beneath the brass knocker Marilyn used to polish before holidays, was a notice from Northfield Mutual Bank foreclosure. Then I saw Lydia. She was 5, with one ponytail higher than the other, chasing a barn cat through grass that came up to her knees. She laughed when the cat slipped under the porch, completely unaware that the paper on the door behind her said the ground beneath her feet was being taken away. From inside the house, Sloane called, "Lydia, come on in, baby." I ducked lower in my seat before I could stop myself. My body still remembered what it felt like to be seen by that house. Lydia ran inside, the door closed. I sat there with both hands around the steering wheel and understood the line I could not cross. If I did nothing, Marilyn would have consequences, Grant would have consequences, Sloane would have consequences. Maybe they deserved every one of them. But Lydia would inherit them. Grandpa's land would be carved into lake houses. The hay ground would become driveways. The barn would come down for a view. I was not saving my mother from consequences. I was saving Lydia from inheriting them. By the time I crossed the county line back toward Burlington, the decision had settled in me. I would not walk into that farmhouse and announce that they needed me. I would not ask for an apology. I would not let Marilyn turn my help into her forgiveness. I would save Hollow Creek invisibly. No name, no money, no thank you. When I got back to my office, I called Nadia Okafor. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Merritt, tell me this is not about a family property." "It is about a farm," I said. A pause, then quieter. "Your farm?" "No," I said, "not anymore." I looked at Grandpa's letter on my desk. I need to save a farm without letting the owners know I'm the one holding the rope. Nadia was silent for one breath, then another. Then we do it clean, she said. Or we don't do it at all. Chapter 4. The picture they were not supposed to see. Nadia came to my office the next morning with a legal pad, a travel mug, and the expression of a woman who had already decided she hated every person involved. She was 46, sharp-eyed, and practical in a way that made people either trust her immediately or fear her for good reason. Nadia Okafor did not romanticize land, family, grief, or legacy. She believed in clean title, signed authority, recorded documents, and not letting emotional people make expensive mistakes in rooms with bad lighting. She sat across from me, opened the folder I had prepared, and read for almost 10 minutes without speaking. When she finally looked up, she said, "So the trust distributed title and operating control to Sloan after Ellis died. Yes, Sloan is the owner of record now. Yes, Marilyn and Grant no longer signed for the farm. Not legally." Nadia's eyebrows lifted, but emotionally. I gave a small laugh that did not sound like one. Emotionally, my mother still thinks she owns the weather. Nadia turned another page. Northfield Mutual is preparing a foreclosure filing. Property taxes are behind. Insurance is almost gone. There is a contractor lien, 2 mortgages. And you want to stop all of that without Sloan knowing you are involved. That is the idea. That is not an idea, Merritt. That is a needle hole you are trying to drive a tractor through. I looked at Grandpa's letter lying beside my keyboard. Can it be done? Nadia leaned back and studied me. Can you do this without needing them to know it was you? I answered too fast. Yes. She heard it. Of course she heard it. Nadia heard hesitation the way bankers heard risk. Still, she nodded once. Then we build the cleanest version possible. The plan came together in pieces, each one small enough to be true. Green Valley Land Trust would contact Sloan directly through Graham Bell, not through me. The offer would be framed as a farmland preservation opportunity for a distressed working property. A conservation buyer would purchase the development rights on Hollow Creek. The money would move through escrow at Northfield Mutual Bank, where it could be applied directly to the back property taxes, the insurance arrears, the contractor lien, part of the second mortgage, and a restructuring of the first. Sloan would not be selling the farm. She would be selling the right to destroy it. No developer. No lakefront subdivision. No row of vacation houses where Grandpa's hay ground used to be. Hollow Creek would remain working farmland, which was the only kind of inheritance Ellis would have recognized. Nadia contacted Tessa Wilcox, the loan officer at Northfield Mutual, that same afternoon. Tessa had the flat, careful voice of someone who spent her workdays telling desperate people what deadlines meant. I can pause the foreclosure filing if we have a signed preservation agreement and escrow confirmation before Friday at noon, Tessa said over speakerphone. Not a promise to sign, not a draft, signed and funded. Nadia looked at me while she wrote it down, Friday noon. 21 days before the formal filing moved forward. 10 days for Green Valley to review. 5 days to get Sloan's signature. 48 hours for escrow to confirm funds once the documents were in place. I had worked under deadlines before. They usually made me focused. This one made me feel as if there were a clock nailed to my ribs. Graham Bell sent the offer to Sloan with Green Valley letterhead, Nadia's office listed as counsel, and Northfield Mutual's escrow instructions attached. My name was nowhere on it. For 2 days, there was nothing. Then Nadia called. She received it. I stood in my office, staring at a parcel map I had already memorized. Did she say anything? She asked why a land trust would care about Hollow Creek. That sounds like Sloan. She also asked whether the offer was real. I closed my eyes. What did Graham tell her? That it was real, time-sensitive, and probably the only reason the bank would pause the next step. That should have been enough, it was not. Sloan called my mother. I knew it before Nadia told me. Fear, in my family, always traveled first to Marilyn. Later, I learned the pieces from Nadia, then from Deborah, then from Sloan herself. Marilyn had answered Sloan's panic with suspicion. Outsiders don't save land for free, my mother said. Calvin, who had never met a loan he did not want to stretch, told Sloan that signing away development rights was crazy. What if we need to sell lake lots later, she said. That road frontage is the only real cash sitting there. Marilyn agreed with him, which told me everything. She told Sloan not to sign anything until your father and I review it. But that night, Sloan sat in the living room at Hollow Creek while Lydia slept on the sofa under a faded quilt. Beside Lydia was a crayon drawing of the farmhouse, the barn, and a yellow sun hanging over a green field. The roof in Lydia's drawing was whole. Sloan looked at that drawing for a long time. The next morning, she called Green Valley back and asked for the meeting. I was not there when they sat down at Northfield Mutual Bank. I could not be there. If I had walked into that room, my mother would have smelled me in the paperwork before I opened my mouth. So, I stayed in Burlington while Nadia joined by conference call. Graham sat across from Sloan, and Tessa Wilcox placed the bank's timeline on the table. According to Nadia, Sloane looked exhausted. Not sad in the polished way my mother approved of, but hollowed out. She had a folder of bills with bent corners and a pen she kept clicking until Tessa asked her gently to stop. Then Marilyn arrived. Of course she did. My mother entered the bank as if it were her own kitchen and tried to take the chair beside Sloane. Tessa stopped her. Mrs. Calder, only the owner or authorized signer can make decisions on this file. Marilyn smiled the way she smiled when someone had embarrassed themselves by forgetting who she was. This is a family property. Tessa did not smile back. It is Sloane Reeves's property of record. That sentence may have been the first useful thing the trust ever did. Marilyn turned to Sloane. You are letting strangers take your inheritance. Sloane's voice shook when she answered, but she answered, no, I'm trying to make sure Lydia still has a home. Nadia told me that no one spoke for several seconds after that. Then Sloane signed. I sat at my desk when the message came through, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself breathe the name Hollow Creek without feeling it slice something open. The next 48 hours moved like weather. Escrow opened. The contractor lien was released. Back property taxes were scheduled for payment. Insurance was reinstated before cancellation. The second mortgage was partially satisfied. The first was restructured under the preservation proceeds. Northfield Mutual paused the foreclosure clock. On paper, it was beautiful. In my body, it felt dangerous. I had done the impossible. I had reached into the house that had erased me and held up the roof without leaving a fingerprint. Then Nadia called again. Her voice was different this time. We have a problem. I looked at the clock. What kind of problem? County filing. Because you prepared the land use analysis, the preservation valuation package, and the compliance memo, Addison County requires a consultant certification signature. I did not understand at first. Or maybe I did, and my mind refused to accept it. Use Graham. Graham can sign for Green Valley's review. He cannot certify work he did not prepare. Then find someone else. We can, but not by Friday. A new consultant would need to review the entire package. Site history, parcel maps, valuation, compliance. We would lose weeks. Weeks we did not have. Nadia's voice softened, which was how I knew the answer was final. If you don't sign, the filing is incomplete. If you do sign, your name becomes part of the county record. I looked down at Grandpa's letter on my desk. You were the only one who loved the soil, not the deed. I had wanted to save Hollow Creek invisibly because I thought that made the act clean. No name, no credit, no chance for Marilyn to twist it into a family performance. But the land did not care whether I was seen. The bank did not care whether I was comfortable. The county recorder did not care what my mother had called me in a lawyer's office. The document needed a name, so I gave it one. Merritt Calder. The filing went through. The foreclosure clock stopped. For 6 days no one called me. I thought maybe the record would sit where records sit. Public but unnoticed, true but unread. I thought maybe Sloane would accept the bank's new terms, sign the refinance papers, and never look closely enough to see the line that mattered. Then my phone rang from a number I had not deleted and had not answered in 3 years. I let it ring twice before picking up. Sloane was breathing hard, like she had walked too fast across a parking lot. Was it you? I closed my eyes. She spoke again, smaller this time. Merritt. Was all of it you? Outside my office window, Burlington traffic moved through the late afternoon like nothing in the world had changed. Yes, I said. There was a sound on the other end, not quite a sob. The land trust, the bank, the taxes, the lien, all of it? Yes. Sloane was quiet so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she asked, "What do you want?" That question hurt more than it should have, because it told me what our family had taught her help was. A debt, a hook, a bill waiting under kindness. Nothing, I said. That was the point. Her voice broke on my name. Merritt. I did not answer. Then she said the thing we both already knew. Mom is going to find out. I looked out over Burlington, at the gray roofs and the lake beyond them, and felt the old cold move through me. Because my mother had spent her entire life rewriting the truth before it could make her look bad. And she would never let a truth like this exist without trying to rename it. Chapter 5. I did not take the deed she knew by Monday. Not because Sloane told her everything. Not because Grant suddenly found a spine. My mother had built her life on sensing when a room was beginning to turn against her, and by the end of that week, too many rooms had changed temperature. She did not call me to say thank you. She called Sloane first. Then my father. Then Mr. Layton. By Tuesday afternoon, Deborah Harlan heard at the feed store that the Calders had found a family solution. By Wednesday, Pastor Elaine sent me a careful message saying she hoped I was doing well and that Marilyn had mentioned I had helped with some paperwork. Some paperwork. That was Marilyn Calder's genius. She did not have to erase the truth completely. She only had to shrink it until it could fit inside a story where she still looked gracious. I forwarded the church message to Nadia. She called me 5 minutes later. We need a final signing meeting, she said. Why? Because your mother is already trying to turn this into a family miracle. And I do not trust miracles that come with Merritt Calder's fingerprints. We lock the structure now. Clean title, recorded easement, bank confirmation, and Lydia's trust documents all in one room. So 3 years after I walked out of Mr. Layton's office with nothing, I walked back into it with every paper that mattered. The room smelled exactly the same: burned coffee, lemon cleaner, old carpet, white light, same conference table, same framed watercolor of a covered bridge in the hallway. It was almost insulting how little the room had changed after changing my life once already. This time Nadia sat beside me. Across the table sat Marilyn in pearls, Grant with both hands folded, Mr. Layton with a folder in front of him, and Sloane, who did not sit between my parents. She sat closer to me. My mother noticed. Of course she noticed. Her jaw moved once, very slightly. Nadia opened her folder. Northfield Mutual has paused the foreclosure filing. Back property taxes have been paid. Insurance has been reinstated. The contractor lien has been released. The second mortgage has been partially satisfied, and the first mortgage has been restructured under the preservation proceeds. Green Valley Land Trust has recorded the development rights purchase. Hollow Creek Farm is now protected working farmland. No lakefront subdivision, no developer sale, no emergency auction. Marilyn smiled too quickly. Yes, as I said, the family came together. Nadia did not look at her. She slid a copy of the county filing onto the table. The consultant who built the preservation package was Merritt Calder. The room went still. Grant looked at the document and I watched him find my name, not hear it, not have someone summarize it. Find it printed in county record, tied to the farm he had once watched me be erased from. His hand trembled before he could hide it under the table. Mr. Layton looked at me, then down at the page. 3 years earlier, he had read the sentence that left me nothing. Now he sat there while another lawyer explained that the daughter with nothing had saved everything. Sloane spoke before my mother could. No, Mom. The family didn't come together. Merritt saved it. Marilyn turned her head slowly. Sloane. My sister did not fold this time. She saved it, Sloane said again. The bank was taking it. I signed because Lydia needed a home, but Merritt built the whole thing. For a second, I saw my mother search for anger and choose softness instead. That was always the more dangerous version of her. Then we fix it, Marilyn said. We put Merritt back where she belongs. Her name can go on the deed. We can amend the trust. We can be whole again. There it was, the thing I had wanted for 3 years. My name restored. A seat at the table. A legal acknowledgement that I belonged to the family I had almost killed myself trying to serve. I could feel the younger version of me sitting somewhere under my ribs, lifting her head at the sound of it. Grant swallowed. Merritt, he said, barely above a whisper. Maybe we should have. He stopped. He still could not finish a true sentence. And for the first time that did not break me. It only made me tired. My father had spent his whole life letting the right words die in his mouth, because peace was easier than courage. I no longer needed to stand beside the grave of every apology he never gave. Nadia placed the final documents on the table. Hollow Creek will move into the Lydia Reeves Conservation Trust. Sloane, as owner and authorized signer, will transfer the farm into the protected structure. Lydia Reeves will be the future beneficiary. Sloane will serve as acting trustee under the terms outlined here. The Green Valley easement remains in force, and Northfield Mutual has already acknowledged the structure in its bank confirmation as part of the restructured mortgage terms. Marilyn and Grant will have no authority to sell, mortgage, or condition family access on the property. Calvin Reeves cannot use the land as collateral. Merritt receives no ownership interest, no repayment, no seat in the Calder family trust, and no distribution. Marilyn stared at the papers. You're giving it to a child? I looked at her. No, I'm protecting it from adults. Sloane picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but she signed. Then she looked at our mother. You gave me the farm so the town could applaud you. Merritt saved it so Lydia could still have a home. Marilyn's face changed. Not enough for a stranger to call it rage, but I knew every muscle in that expression. You're being dramatic, she said. You always needed a scene. No, Mom, I said. I needed a family. I stopped confusing the two. She pushed a separate amendment toward me. Take your name back. Take the deed. Stop punishing us. I looked at the page. My name was typed neatly in the place I had once begged to exist, and I understood the trap completely. If my mother could give me my worth at that table, she could take it away at that table. If I accepted her restoration, I would still be living under her measurement. A kinder measurement, maybe. A more generous one, because I had become too useful to ignore, but still hers. I pushed the amendment back. If you can give me my worth at this table, you can take it away at this table. I'm done letting you hold the ruler. Then I signed only the documents Nadia had prepared for Lydia's trust. Not the deed for myself, not the family trust amendment. Not the seat my mother offered after the table had already turned. When I stood, Grant reached for my sleeve. Merritt, that was all he had. I let his fingers hold the fabric for 1 second. Not because he deserved it, but but because I was no longer afraid that kindness would drag me back. Then I gently pulled my arm away. I walked out of Mr. Layton's office without crying. Not because it did not hurt, because his hurt was no longer the person in charge. Hollow Creek stayed standing for a while. Marilyn still tried to soften the story at church. She called it a family restructuring. She said hard seasons brought people together. But Addison County records told the truth more quietly and more permanently than any version she could polish. The preservation package carried my name. The bank confirmation recognized the protected structure. The land was secured for Lydia, and the deed was no longer a weapon my mother could raise over anyone's head. A few months later, Grant mailed me a letter. I placed it in Grandpa Ellis's box and did not open it. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I will not. The difference is I no longer need the contents of that envelope to decide whether I am whole. Sloan sends me pictures sometimes. Lydia running through hayground no developer will ever turn into condos. Lydia holding a barn cat with both arms. Lydia standing under a sky that still belongs to the farm. I do not go back often. But the first time I drove down Lake Marrow Road without taking the long way around, I understood something. Hollow Creek was no longer the place where I had been erased. It was the place where I chose not to erase myself. My mother once used a trust document to tell me I was worth nothing. 3 years later, my signature saved everything she almost lost. But the real victory was never Hollow Creek. The real victory was walking out of that room, without needing any of them to tell me I had value. If you were me, would you have saved Hollow Creek for Lydia? Or would you have let the family lose everything?